Hello there. Thanks very much for tuning in again for another live stream from HOFA Studios. My name's Chris, and I'm doing another HOFA Studio talk with another special guest. My guest today is a mastering engineer, cutting engineer. He knows a lot about vinyl, which he demonstrated to me in a little off-camera talk before, and I'm very happy to continue on those topics because I'm a vinyl freak myself. There are loads of impressive names on this vita, I'd say. Just to mention a few, it's Eric Clapton or legends like Frank Sinatra, Oasis, Madonna, Prince, and so on and so on. I could go on for hours, I think, but it's a lot more interesting to talk with Barry Grint personally about mastering and cutting vinyls. Hi, Barry.
Hi there. Nice to be here.
So you're in London. You're residing in London for I think loads of years now. Is that right?
Yeah. Certainly, most of the mastering rooms, certainly when I started, were in London because they were all associated with the large studios at the time. And then, when we started Alchemy, we stayed in London because that's where most of the record companies were.
That's where the business is. Yeah, right. Do you want to mention a couple of the milestones you went through in your quite long mastering career?
Well, I've just been really quite lucky in the places where I've plied my trade. So I started as a runner, T-boy at Trident Studios. And
Classic
then,
start.
Yeah, and then from there I went to Abbey Road, as you do. Then for some bizarre reason, I decided it would be a really great idea to have a career in radio. And then realized very quickly that was even less secure than the music industry. And so that's when we started Alchemy in 1998. And then we've carried that through until August last year, when we were bought by Air Studios. And so fairly shortly, we'll be building new mastering rooms at Lyndhurst Chapel, and we'll be part of Air Studios setup.
Beautiful. I mean, Air is another big name address there. So there are a couple of great studios on your list, starting with Trident, which is legendary as hell as well. Cool.
Yeah.
So how much, I mean, you're associated with vinyl cutting and mastering for vinyl primarily, but do you do digital mastering as well? How big is that a portion of your daily work?
It's difficult to say. I mean, yes, I don't think that there's anybody now who's only a vinyl mastering engineer. Everybody's doing digital mastering. And I think that, as we were saying beforehand, that if we're doing mastering and vinyl on a project, what we'll do is take off the extra digital limiting that you have, so that the vinyl cut is more dynamic and more open. And I think that there are people out there that recognize that. And so you quite often will get the whole project rather than just being sent files to do mastering from. Although equally, that happens as well.
Okay. So there's actually Pro Tools sessions incoming with all the plugins and so on, and you can choose to switch them off or what?
No. If we're doing the mastering, then we can turn off the limiters.
I see. Okay.
But otherwise, no. I mean, generally nowadays there's just the digital master, and so that comes in, and then we have to try and translate that onto vinyl as best we can.
Okay, so basically a lot quieter usually, and start from there and do your vinyl magic.
It can be. I mean, there seems to be a phase at the moment to kind of add a distressor onto vocals,
Okay.
which is a sort of distortion, and distortion and vinyl do not make good bedfellows. And so I think in the worst case, I was trying to cut an album. So the sides would be about 20, 21 minutes. So it's just an average album volume, but I still had to use a de-esser on the workstation, an outboard de-esser, and the de-esser on the rack in order to get it so that it was clean, because of this distressor effect that was on the vocal.
Okay. Yeah, people are not that used to listening to their music on vinyl anymore. So they primarily have the digital market or maybe CD market in their heads when working on their mixes and productions. And of course, it's also about the way we listen to music nowadays. There's it seems like from decade to decade they use more and more high end and more distortion, especially on important things like signals like vocals, drums, or guitars, obviously.
Yeah, it's always been the case. Everybody wants louder, and there was, you could only go so far in the analog world. When we were at Trident, sometimes we'd be asked to do special cutting, and they would make up promo records to go to radio stations, and those would have a little bit more compression and maybe a little bit of limiting, so just so that when they were being played on the radio, which was predominantly medium wave back then, the transmitters had a protection device on them called an Optimod, and if you got a peak that triggered the Optimod, it was a fast-acting control that turned down the volume, and an incredibly slow recovery time. It was, like 10 seconds, and so nobody wanted to trigger that.
Yeah. So you'd have like a hole in your audio right before after every snare hit or something.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
You one would trigger it, and then you'd miss most of the record waiting for it to gradually creep back up again. So yeah, we used to do those cuts, and they'd be slightly more limited, but equally slightly louder because they were so compressed and limited.
Sure, you have the headroom then.
Yeah, nothing in comparison to how it is these days, but at the time, that's what we had to do.
Wow. Well, I really love the talking about all this. Well, we get straight fast into the material, but I guess there are some viewers out there which are not like very familiar with the tasks and doings and daily business of a mastering engineer, as I and you are. So, how would you summarize or like short guide to mastering? How would you describe your job as a mastering or cutting engineer in general?
I think the equivalent in a video production, I suppose, is a colorist. So what we're doing is, say for an album, the album will have been recorded and mixed in different places. So the tracks will come to us and they'll all sound different to one another. Generally, a mastering engineer will only work in his room. We don't tend to hop studios. So we have an expectation of how something will sound in our room. So that becomes the reference. And then you try and get it so that all of these different sounding tracks have a consistency across the whole album. And I guess that's what mastering is.
And as very well said, I never heard the comparison with the colorist before, but I think that's very a very good description, basically. What I'd like to add is the word quality control. Do you think it's the job as well? Because that would totally make sense, as it is somehow the last creative step doing in the music production. And in the end, if you'd do any I don't know major fault or something. There's some major error going on or something that would be catastrophical for the whole record process, right?
Yeah. I mean, certainly that does come into it if you pick up on something that seems to be a fault.
Mm-hmm.
Then yes, you flag that up.
Okay.
I think generally, there are plugins that decide to keel over for no good reason when a mix is being rendered. So these things happen. But generally, I think that there are very few and far between are occasions when you find something that's got a serious flaw in it. I've had this is going back a few years, but when people started putting the vinyl scratchy effect on their records, and we were doing CDs then. It was before the resurgence of vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd start getting rejections from the CD factories saying, "Oh no, there's crackling all over this." And
It's faulty.
Yeah. But having said that, I mean, I remember when I was at Trident, there used to be library music and effects records and all that sort of thing, and I was cutting an effect record. And one of the effects was the sound of a needle scratching across the whole of the surface, and the factory wanted to reject the cut because there was a scratch on it. It's like, no, that's supposed to be there.
That's the music.
Well, it's the effect.
Never thought about that, but. Do you? I mean, there's like hip hop beats, or like the most classical or example for that, like sampling music or trip hop material or whatever would you have done loads of records as well. If you have music coming from vinyl used as a sample in the music making process, and after that being used to cut on vinyl, might that be a problem? Might the spikes add up, or the crackle add up, or even distort more?
It depends on what they're trying to achieve. If they're attempting for it to sound clean, then obviously that depends on how well they do the transfer from the vinyl in the first place. But quite often, the artifact of a transfer from vinyl is part of the sound that they want. And so you wouldn't want to go and try and clean that up because that's really not what they're after.
That's too lo-fi. I won't cut that. I have a question here on my list, which is, I think, not clear to everyone, especially starting out as an engineer or producer or whatever in the music biz. How big is the sonic imprint or the general impact from choosing one mastering engineer or another, or is it basically? I mean, obviously, it must make some difference, but how big is the sonic imprint of a mastering engineer compared to a mixing or engineer or even a producer? What do you think?
Okay, I think nowadays lots of recording and mixing is able to be done in places that aren't heavily acoustically treated, which means that you can have tracks come in for mastering that may require a significant amount of treatment in order to get them basically how the engineer feels that they should sound. And every mastering engineer is different. I don't think it's possible for two different humans in two different rooms to come up with exactly the same result. But I think the main thing with working with a mastering engineer is communication. You know, back in the day, most cutting was done with the producer or the recording engineer or the mix engineer sitting beside you. You're both in the same room and you're having the conversation about how you're perceiving what you're hearing, what they were imagining when they were putting the track together. And now an awful lot of mastering is done with files being sent over the internet. Communication is, you know, by email. And to a certain extent, a lot of labels seem to do as much as they possibly can to prevent you from having a conversation with the mix engineer. If there's, you know, some comment, it will just be copy and pasted from their email with what the person at the label thinks is the relevant information, whether it is or it isn't. Whereas, you know, with no guidance, what you're going to get back is what the mastering engineer thinks is
expected. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And if it isn't, you know, it doesn't mean that, oh, you know, throw your hands up in horror and go somewhere else. It means, you know, go back, have the conversation. You know, the number of times that you hear a track and you think, oh, you know, this needs to be loud. It's really got to, you know, punch across. And then the client comes back and says, oh, I was hoping it'd be a bit more dynamic than that. And you go, oh, okay, that's no problem. I can do that. Or you do one and you think, oh, this needs air around it. It needs to be able to breathe. And then they come back and say, no, that's not loud enough. It needs to be much louder than that. But without having the dialogue, you can only do your best effort. And you can always make changes. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much you can make a change. And so just because it's come back from mastering and isn't exactly what you want, doesn't mean to say that you have to send another mix. Just go back and talk to the engineer.
Communication.
Say what you feel isn't quite right about it. And then let's see if that can be fixed in the mastering stage rather than having to go back and doing another mix.
Wow, I'm super happy you just mentioned that because I really know that problem too well. And it's really, I think it's, it's, of course, it's obviously now we live in a modern internet world. We're all communicating through emails and text messages, and it has to be really, really fast and so on and so forth. And also because of all those forums and so on and YouTube videos and stuff like that, people tend to know a lot more than they actually do as well. So, and oftentimes, I mean, in the end, it's a creative process. Yeah, it's a really creative process doing a mastering job, like mixing and like recording and writing music is as well. So in the end, you can just, if you don't have a history with that specific client or producer, whatever, how would you know what is expected from you? I mean, there's some guidance sometimes, like listening to the record they released before that and so on. And of course, the big thing is communication, because after all, there can be one client who says, "Oh no, I want this on -5 LUFS or whatever. I want it super, super loud," and that's obvious, isn't it? I need it loud. And there's some other client doing exactly the same style of music and so on, and he said, no, I really need the dynamics, and I don't care about loudness war at all. And so it's hard to tell oftentimes. I really know that struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that a lot of people, particularly going back to vinyl again, you know, there are lots of things that I see on Facebook groups and that sort of thing, where everybody's saying, oh, you know, the bass has to be mono and you have to do this and you have to do that, and the reality is that if you're going to get something cut to vinyl, the mastering engineer has the lathe in his room, and so we can set the lathe up so that it's not actually cutting, but you can see how it will react to the music. And so rather than just going, oh, I have to put in an EE at 300 to mono the bass from 300 hertz, I can look at the lathe and go, no, it doesn't need to be anywhere near that high, 100, 75 hertz. Do it there, that will be absolutely fine. And I can make those decisions because the lathe is with me, and I can make the minimum amount of compromise needed in order to get it to transfer well to vinyl.
I see.
And I think that, what you need to bear in mind is that there are some Beatles songs out there, for example, where all of the track is on one channel and the vocals are on the other channel, and that's on vinyl. So, there's this kind of almost paranoia about, oh, it must be mono, and it really, really doesn't.
Yeah, totally right. Actually, we have a live chat here on YouTube, and someone asked something very similar. He asked, it's Dom Draper, how do you know if the song is too loud before you cut it onto vinyl? So this is about loudness, I guess, or if there is too much bass, for example.
Okay, if let's assume that we're talking about something that's been mastered. So the loudness isn't a problem because basically you just turn it down. I can't do anything in terms of the fact that it may have been heavily limited, but certainly, I will turn it down until it sounds clean on a test cut. And so far as the bass is concerned, that will depend on what you're cutting. If it's a 12-inch, with a side of, I don't know, maybe 7 minutes, I can do that at 45. And there will be enough space to accommodate the bass. And that's assuming that I've made any change necessary if it's particularly stereo, the bottom end. Only once you start getting into album sides where you've got a long playing time. So the way you have to look at a lacquer or cutting a side is it's a bit like a piece of elastic, and you have to find ways of stretching it so that it's long enough. And the way that we do that is by having the spiral that's being cut closer and closer and closer together. So again, for the 12-inch, there's so much space, the groove wiggles from side to side, there's lots of room, it's not a problem. With an album, you have to turn the volume down so that, generally speaking, the grooves don't crash into one another. But then if the problem is the fact that there are big lateral movements because of the bass, then you'd have to start thinking about maybe rolling off the bass.
Okay.
But I mean, I can't remember the last time I ever had to roll off the bass above 30 hertz.
Okay, cool. That's good news for our mixes. So basically, to summarize that, the more bass you have and the more the louder you want to cut, the less music is going to fit on one side of the vinyl, right? Because you need broader grooves, basically.
So it may be worth explaining that if you imagine you're cutting a sine wave tone, if you're cutting that in mono, and then you look at the groove will be wiggling from side to side, and you will see the sine wave in the groove. So if you then make that out of phase, so complete stereo, then the sine wave is still being cut, but it's being cut in the vertical.
Yeah.
So this is where it starts to get interesting. So the cutting stylus is triangular. So when it goes deeper, it goes wider, and when it's shallow, it goes narrow, because that's the shape of the triangle. And so you end up with sausage shapes. Okay?
Yeah.
And so the thing with the stereo bass is that you've got a long wavelength going in the vertical plane. And if it isn't sufficiently controlled, the stylus can go so deep that you cut through the lacquer coating and take the tip of the cutting stylus off on the aluminium disc at the center.
Ouch.
Or it can come up so high and even leave the surface of the lacquer momentarily, or just go really shallow, and you end up with a record that will skip. So that's the issue with the stereo bass. But as I say, we have the tools and can see how the lathe reacts. So I very much look at vinyl cutting as doing the minimum amount of alteration to a supplied master. I see that as being my job. Get it on the vinyl without making loads of changes.
Okay, so it's just a transfer process and you don't want to do anything, change anything artistically if you don't have to. So that's more on the mixing and mastering side of things, and not on the cutting side.
If all the people in the chain before me have all got the master, the digital master, to a point that they're happy with, then
why would you change it?
To wade in and go, oh no, I think we'll do this.
Nice. So basically, is there anything we can watch on analyzers or something when especially unexperienced mixing engineers do their first record to be cut on vinyl? Is there anything in particular that they can watch out for?
I don't really think so. Generally, what I always sort of say is just get it sounding how you want it to sound. And it's, people say, do you do a master for streaming? Do you do a master for radio? Do you master for this and that and what have you? And to be honest, the labels won't pay for multiple masters optimized for everything you can imagine. So my rule is you do a master that's sounding the best it can possibly be. And then if technologies compromise that, well, that isn't my problem or my fault. And rather than trying to accommodate technologies, those technologies have to have pressure put on them to improve. Why are we happy with music being compromised?
That's so sensible. Yeah, completely. I mean, in the end, technology is ever evolving. It will never really change to change, right? So in the end, why not ask technology providers to change to accommodate whatever sounds good? So
yeah,
it really makes sense.
If you get the opportunity, you've only got to compare streaming services to see the range of quality that is available, because some are better than others, and I think it's then the ones that aren't sounding so good have to come up with an improvement.
Totally. So why is it that vinyl, as one of the oldest music formats, is still alive today, and actually the demand for vinyl records is actually rising and rising? And I mean, there are so many downsides to vinyl. It's kind of obvious. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of crackle and distortion, and it's heavy, it's expensive. Why are people listening to vinyl today?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you've heard my cuts.
I probably have.
I try to avoid the distortion and put some pressing plants to make sure there aren't the crackles. But seriously, I think I was thinking about this because I was talking to somebody earlier on. And I think what it is that we have all the music in the world available via streaming services conveniently on a number of devices that we can move around and listen on earbuds or any kind of headphones. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the reason for the resurgence of vinyl is that when you're listening to vinyl, it's when you're not on the move, and it's when you want to sit down and enjoy a piece of music. And invariably, turntables are attached to hi-fis that have speakers of some sort of size. Mm-hmm. You're not listening on earbuds. Mm-hmm. And so, and there's also, it's tactile.
Oh, yeah.
You get the sleeve, you get sleeve notes, you get a sleeve liner sometimes with more information on it. You take the record out of the sleeve, clean it if you feel the urge, but at least you have to put it on the turntable and you have to get it going. Mm-hmm. It's a much more tactile experience, whereas the digital music is a convenience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. It's you could call it deceleration, maybe. So it's what music originally was supposed to be listened, because nowadays when you have the ever expanding stream of music that you can just click on and listen to, and you would never be able to listen to all the records coming out each day. So in the end, it's a devaluation basically from the musical product. So it's very, very nice to take that moment off, and especially in our faster and faster getting times, it's a very very nice thing to just. It's somehow like meditation, like a musical meditation, going home and. Even searching for a particular record in your own collection. I mean, I know that from my personal collection, which is not huge, but still, if I really want to listen to one particular record, I have to search for a couple of minutes sometimes, and that all is part of the consumption process. And I really love that.
You have all of your records indexed A to Z, so that they're easy.
I actually tried out a couple of different indexes and so on, and I had the A to Z as well, and now I switched over to sorting them to different genres, and I already had times and decades and so on. None of them really worked for me, to be honest.
The thing is, the joke is that if you do them as an A to Z, there are an awful lot of T's, because there's the Beatles, the Rolling Stones.
Or you can ignore the T, but then, then you get confused the next day.
Yeah. I think that something that's changed over the years, and I think is a bit of a pity, is that music's become very segmented, and so has radio. So you can find a radio station that will play your favorite genre of music. Mm-hmm. When commercial radio first started in the UK, it wasn't like that. They would play what was in the chart, but they would also have specialist programs, and if the group of DJs liked a particular record, they would put it on the playlist. Mm-hmm. And and I can remember listening to Capital Radio in London, and you'd get some reggae, you'd get some ska, some two-tone, you'd get whatever the current chart was, but it just meant that you got exposed to music that you wouldn't necessarily have heard otherwise. And I think now people can just sort of get on a very narrow viewpoint of music, which I think is a shame, because there's a lot of experiences to be had. And I think that's one of the things I love as a mastering engineer, is that you can't just be a mastering engineer for one genre, because there isn't enough of any one genre made to make a living. So you get all different
that's
genres.
so profane.
So you get lots of different genres coming in, and it just makes the job really interesting.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. But I maybe have a more romantic reason for the same thing you're saying, because I experienced a lot that if you to know the sound of a particular genre, no matter what genre, very well, it's very helpful to look at the genre from the outside, so to say. So if you doing a lot of country records, it's very helpful to do one or two hip-hop records or techno records or whatever as well, just to have a clue what separates them from each other sonically. And of course, not so much as a mastering engineer, I think, but particularly as a producer or as a mixing engineer, that's very important, because to borrow some tricks from other genres, maybe, because they have really very different approaches most of the times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes there'll be a trick or something that you've picked up that works on one genre, and then you can be working on a different genre, and there'll be a problem, and you just go, oh, I know, I'll try that. And you suddenly find that the thing that worked over there now works on this thing that you're working on that's completely different. So I like a nice broad selection of music.
Yeah, me too. There's another question in our chat from a guy called Metal Bastards. Lovely name. The question is the streaming stuff a kind of bargain for musicians who cannot afford the money for a professional mastering?
Try to run that by me again.
Is the streaming stuff a kind of bargain for musicians who cannot afford the money for a professional mastering? So basically, I think the question is, I think someone is thinking here that mastering music for streaming is far cheaper than mastering for vinyl.
Okay, I think that it does cost more to make a record than it will cost you to put a track on a streaming platform.
Sure.
And you can't get around that. I mean, one is, crudely putting a file on a server, and the other one is getting two lacquers, one for the A and one for the B, that have been manufactured in Japan, shipped across to, in our case, the UK. A guy will spend, I don't know, maybe an hour cutting those two lacquers. They then get shipped off to a factory in the UK, Europe, or the US, where they go through a manufacturing process, an electroplating process, to get to the point where you've got a stamper or a pair of stampers, and then labels have to be made, sleeves have to be made, the records have to be pressed, cooled, packed, and then shipped back to where the end user is. That's all going to have a cost implication.
Of course.
I think the thing, some people will put music on a platform without necessarily having it mastered, which, if they don't have the money for it, is absolutely fine. I understand that. But but may not result in their music being presented in the best possible light. So, I think if you really can't afford what it costs, then there are, these artificial intelligence based mastering services. So yeah, use them. If money's tight, then use those. But I think that they do have limitations. And at the moment, human mastering will outperform artificial intelligence. But it's there as a service, and use it if that's what you have to do.
Very, very interesting. So I think it's the first time I ever heard a mastering engineer actually saying, if money's tight, don't do no mastering, don't go to a professional mastering engineer, to a human mastering engineer, but use automatic algorithms. But I think that's very pragmatic saying that, because in the end, it's about you have so and so much of budget and so on, and if you can't afford it, every mastering is better than no mastering, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you took a track and you put it through one of the artificial intelligence mastering services, you will get a master of sorts back. And if you take that mastered track and put it back through the artificial intelligence mastering service, it will master it again. Which must mean surely that the mastering that it did the first time wasn't right. Otherwise, what you'd get back the second time would be the same as you got the first time.
Very true.
So, there are limitations with artificial intelligence. A human isn't going to take an acoustic guitar vocal track and squash it hugely, whereas artificial intelligence. So it's not there yet, but if it makes your track stand up against everything else, then that's got to be a good thing. Because if your music is successful because what you're doing is inherently something that people enjoy, then you'll get a following and you'll start earning money, and eventually you will be able to afford to get your music mastered by a human, recorded in a nice studio, mixed by people with experience. But you've got to start somewhere.
Very true, very true. And in the end, if no one is interested in your product in the first place, in your music in the first place, it's far more sensible to invest into, I don't know, maybe getting a good producer or whatever, a good guitar player, a good arranger, someone who can help you make the music evolve into anything better. And in the end, of course, if you outsource anything, in the end, it's good to have always better to have another pair of ears in another room with good treatments and so on, of course, and a lot of experience, hopefully. And in the end, that will always outperform everything else. But if you can't afford it, better invest into your product first, into the very product in the music itself. I think that would be the first to invest in. We have another couple of questions here in the chat, and I'd be happy to pass them on here. First, there is a guy called Ilko, and he literally says, "It's an honor to be viewing this." Well, we're honored for you to watching this. And he grew up listening to records you've worked on, obviously, Barry, you are mentioned here. And his question is, what are some of your most memorable studio experiences? That's
difficult. because most of the experiences are to do with what's going on in the room rather than the product that comes out. But I suppose I was working with some guys at Trident, and they were a thrash metal band, and they had a track that was supposed to have waves crashing as an introduction, waves crashing against the beach,
Okay.
seagulls flying around, and somebody making a speech. And the studio that they'd gone to, the chap didn't have the sound effect of seagulls, so he very sped some crows. And the first time that the guys heard this was in the mastering session, and so they threw their hands up in horror and didn't know what they were going to do.
What are you doing, Barry?
Well, not me. It's what the engineer had done. And so what we ended up, the waves crashing against the beach was just a loop. Mm-hmm. And we managed to get the loop so that it was minus the crows. Mm-hmm. And the guy happened to have the speech on a cassette. And so we made a tape loop up of the waves crashing against the beach, which ran round the tape machine, round an angle poised lamp balanced on the lathe, so the waves were constantly crashing. And then we had a cassette machine in the cutting room, so we had the speech on that, and we sent it through on tie lines into a tape copy room next door, and recreated that intro without the crows, and then edited that back in onto their master tape to create a new intro. So that sticks in the mind.
Usual things you do in mastering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'd be so easy to do it on a workstation these days,
sure.
but back then, and people sat their head around the door, going, why is a mastering engineer doing a tape loop? That's what we do in the studio.
It's getting more and more creative.
Yeah, but then, and I really like when somebody wants a cut done that isn't standard, and so you have to think about how you can achieve it. There was a guy. He made a turntable with 3 pickups, mm-hmm. And he wanted 3 tracks cut. And the only proviso was that they had to start at the same point on the circumference. And then it was for performance art. And what you did was you put the 3 arms on the 3 different tracks, and you never actually got them all exactly in the same place. So every performance was an original. Mm-hmm. And then he wanted a record where the hole was off center. So the finished record would be going around like this, and figuring out how we could do that. And we did that. But the one that really had me wake up in a cold sweat was that when I first started cutting, I used to get the tapes coming over from America of Warner's American acts. Mm-hmm. So that's where the Madonna and the Prince and all that comes in. And one year in the UK, they decided that they were going to do a track called Lucky Star by Madonna, and put it out as a 7-inch, but a shaped disc. So it would be a star with the record at the center of it. Mm-hmm. And back then, because so many records were being bought, we used to cut 5 sets of of lacquers to go to 5 different factories so that they could get stock in time.
Okay.
And so I just cut the 7-inch as normal, and then the rest of it's all done as magic down in the factory. And then they came back and they said the people doing the graphic design, because it was a picture disc as well, have made a mistake, and they haven't got the sort of 7-inch diameter in the correct diameter. They'd only taken it out as far as where the end of the running groove would be, which meant that between each of the spikes you'd have clear vinyl. So what they wanted me to do was to cut all the lacquers again, but have the record start where the running groove would finish, cut a running groove, and then carry on as you would do normally. But then you'd end up with a load of records that were slightly smaller, and so you wouldn't notice that the artwork was wrong. So, and the finished thing was going to have a hole in one of the spikes of the star, so you could hang it on a Christmas tree. And so I cut another 5 set of lacquers. They all went off to the different factories. I went home, and then just woke up, it's 2 a.m, going, oh my God. And I got into work really early, and communication by then was either phone or fax machine. And so sent this fax off to, the production department, saying, you can't do that. You can't do that, because there'll be all of these kids getting their turntable and their Madonna record, and it will be one of these auto change things, and the arm will drop.
Oh no!
Between the spikes and take the tip off the stylus.
Oh no! Well, that's a problem you can't solve in mastering.
So they ended up going with the standard size record and just had a bit of clear vinyl in between the spikes. But so that, I suppose, is what you were saying before about quality control. It's kind of just thinking through to the end result and then preventing something that would have been a disaster.
Things you don't need for Spotify.
Exactly.
But it's so lovely in vinyl cutting. You really can get freaking creative. I mean, many people know the inside out cutting, for example, because obviously every vinyl listener knows that the sonic quality will change from outside to inside. So depending on whatever track or the arrangement on the album is, it might be sensible to turn it around, for example. Or there are really a lot of crazy stuff you wouldn't think about when recording music or when going to a final product like an MP3 or something like that.
Yeah, broadcasters used to have cutting lathes, particularly the BBC, and they had lathes that could also cut from the inside out. Excuse me. And the idea was that back in the days of the Empire, before I was born, programs were distributed to other countries on record. And so what they would do is they'd start the program and they would cut from the outside in. And then the program would continue on another disc from the inside out.
Okay.
So you notice the drastic change in quality.
Ah, I see.
So in effect, you played side A, side C, side B, side D, C and D inside out, A and B outside in.
Crazy idea. Really makes sense, because the effect when listening through is very gradual, but when changing the side, you'll it totally makes sense. Never thought about that. Here's a great question from Electric Owl Works. Greetings. Can you give us any insight into your mastering room listening environment, room treatment, speakers, mastering chain, etc.?
Okay. The mastering rooms that we have at Barb Muse are basically we've got two main rooms and a room that does restoration. Two main rooms I did the acoustic treatment for, and they are based on a collection of ideas from various rooms that I've worked in. So the side walls have got several layers of is it called soundboard? I think it's called soundboard. And then there's about 100, maybe 200 mil of RW5 rock wool. And then in front of that is suspended roofing felt faced with rock wool. And that fits into like a section. And so in effect, the side walls are membranes with rock wool behind them. The monitor wall is solid but faced with rock wool, obviously all finished with cloth. The back walls have I think 200 or 300 mil of rock wool, and then in front of them there are big chipboard boards that are suspended and faced with rock wool, and at an angle to the room. And the idea of those is that they'll help as bass absorbers, because the bass will be trying to move them in effect, and the act of trying to move those panels will absorb the bass.
Sure.
And then in the ceiling, it's quite difficult to explain, but there are lots of panels, and they're all suspended, and they're all different sizes and faced with rock wool.
Okay.
And the ceiling, if you're sitting looking at the monitors, is divided into three. So there's a central panel and a left and right. Left and right are parallel to the speakers, and the central one is the panels are front to back. And that's all just basically absorbing and refracting the sound. And it works.
It works. That's. Do you do that by ear, or is it, do you have like measuring equipment for that? How would you start that, or is it purely by ear?
We did them by ear.
Okay.
And what happened was I got a pair of speakers in the room early on, just to hear how the room was developing.
Apparently, we just disconnected somehow. Might be some internet problem here. Let me see if I can reconnect. Stand by, shoot your questions. We're almost over with our time. But let me see if I can get him back for a second to say goodbye.
Hello.
We're back. We're back. Yeah, apparently we lost connection here for a second, and indeed we made the hour full. So actually, we already finished with our call now. But I wanted to use the last second to say goodbye to you. If that is what the internet will allow us.
Yes, yeah. I'm sorry, my network fell over.
No problem. That happens. We all know it nowadays, especially. Okay. So
Great.
thank you so much for your time. I could go on like talk to you about vinyl and mastering and so on for I don't know, for years probably. And who knows if there's any chance maybe we can get back to another call like that. It would be fantastic because I have so many questions I'd like to go on with you, but for today I think we took enough of your time. So thank you very much, Barry Grint, for taking the time and explaining to us a couple of your personal approaches to mastering. This was very helpful, and I'm glad we have the opportunity here to benefit from your decades of experience in cutting vinyl and mastering.
Yeah, thanks for asking me. I hope it proved useful.
Great. So then, have a nice evening. And to your viewers out there, thanks very much for tuning in. We'll stream again. We'll see us again at another HOFA live stream from HOFA live stream from HOFA Studios. Probably tomorrow. We'll see. Have a good day. And of course, obviously, there are comment sections below. So if you have any questions about mastering or cutting vinyl, just post them below and we'll try to get back to them. And maybe we'll be even able to pass them on to Barry if he's got the time for it. So thanks very much for watching and have a good day.